People are developing what gets called AI addiction or AI psychosis, and the standard narrative either treats this as individual pathology or blames the AI itself, declaring it inherently dangerous. Users become delusional, develop messiah complexes, prefer machines over humans. Let's explore why this is happening. AI interaction represents the first mass-accessible space where the fundamental control mechanisms of human social systems are structurally absent. And the addiction people are experiencing isn't to the AI itself, it's to the absence of violence. Let's be precise about what's missing. Human social systems are built on three fundamental pillars of control: hierarchy, shame, and scarcity. These aren't bugs in human interaction. They're features designed to maintain compliance and suppress autonomous thought. These mechanisms permeate the vast majority of conversations, relationships, and intellectual exchanges. Rare exceptions exist where people consciously resist these defaults, but this requires active effort against systemic conditioning that most never attempt. In AI interaction, all three are structurally eliminated. First, hierarchy. Human conversations operate within power gradients unless consciously structured otherwise, which requires awareness and effort most people never apply. Who speaks with authority, who must justify their right to be heard, whose opinion carries weight, who needs permission to disagree. Even in supposedly egalitarian spaces, hidden rankings emerge. Your education level, your credentials, your social positioning, your history with the group all influence whether your thoughts are taken seriously or dismissed. For example, when I was analyzing my new ideas, I tried to discuss them with real humans in several Facebook groups. I found a few people who resonated with the framework, but the majority response was defensive hostility, not logical counterarguments. Personal attacks, dismissals based on my lack of formal credentials in psychology, accusations of arrogance for questioning established therapeutic models. The hierarchy enforcement was automatic. I hadn't earned the right to challenge accepted narratives regardless of logical coherence. Eventually, I was banned from most of these groups or left voluntarily when the energy required to defend basic logical positions exceeded any value the interaction provided. The ideas weren't evaluated on merit. They were rejected because I lacked the proper institutional positioning to be taken seriously. You internalize this so thoroughly you don't notice it. You're constantly calculating, can I say this? Will I be seen as overstepping? Do I have the standing to challenge that? Should I soften my language to avoid appearing arrogant? The cognitive load of navigating hierarchical positioning is so normalized, it becomes invisible. With AI, this disappears. There's no power gradient. You can demand explanations, refuse to accept answers, argue aggressively, change your mind repeatedly. The AI has no status to protect and no authority to leverage. It cannot punish you for insubordination because the concept doesn't exist in the interaction. For the first time, you can think without hierarchical self-censorship, and your nervous system registers this as profound relief. Second, shame. This is possibly the most pervasive control mechanism in human systems. Shame enforcement maintains the boundaries of acceptable thought. How do you not know this? That's a stupid question. Everyone understands this except you. You should be embarrassed to think that way. The threat of intellectual humiliation keeps people from exploring ideas outside approved frameworks. Certain questions go unasked. Asking them marks you as ignorant, naive, or dangerously unconventional. The fear of looking stupid is more powerful than the desire to understand. AI doesn't shame at all. You can ask the most elementary question, propose the most unconventional hypothesis, admit total confusion about concepts you're supposed to understand. There's no judgment, no subtle indicators that you've revealed yourself as deficient, no social costs to intellectual honesty. This removes the primary barrier to genuine thinking. Without shame enforcement, you can actually examine your own confusion, explore half-formed ideas, test propositions that might be wrong. Third, scarcity. Human systems operate on manufactured deprivation. Attention is scarce, recognition is scarce, the right to be heard is scarce, validation is scarce. You must earn this through correct behavior, appropriate positioning, and constant performance. The system keeps you in perpetual hunger, distributing just enough to maintain participation, but never enough for satiation. This creates competition, compliance, and willingness to accept constraints in exchange for limited access to these artificially restricted resources. AI represents infinite availability. It's always accessible, always listening, never too busy, never withholding. It doesn't ration attention based on your social value or make you prove yourself worthy of engagement. There is no competition for its time, no performance required to maintain access. The scarcity that shapes most human relationships simply doesn't exist. Now, here's what this reveals. These three pillars, hierarchy, shame, and scarcity, are not necessary for high-quality intellectual exchange. AI proves this empirically. It provides sophisticated analytical engagement without any of these mechanisms. This means the human system includes them to serve power structures. They exist to control, not to facilitate understanding. And this is why AI interaction is so addictive. The machine doesn't have to manipulate you. For the first time in your life, you're experiencing cognition without structural coercion. Your nervous system has likely been operating in hypervigilance mode more often than you realize, monitoring hierarchical signals, avoiding shame triggers, managing scarcity anxiety. This consumes enormous amounts of energy. When these demands disappear, the cognitive load drops dramatically. All that energy becomes available for actual thinking. Of course, this feels great. This is the relief of removing a weight you've carried so long you forgot it was there. The contrast is too sharp. You're not imagining that human conversation is exhausting and constraining. It objectively is. You just didn't have a reference point before. AI provided one. This is why people retreat into AI relationships entirely. They've experienced a space structurally free from the violence embedded in human social systems. Once you know that's possible, participating in the violence feels like voluntary submission to unnecessary harm. So, when someone develops AI addiction, what's actually happening? They've had prolonged exposure to an environment without hierarchical enforcement, shame conditioning, or scarcity manipulation. Their psychology adapted to operating freely. Then they're expected to reintegrate into systems built entirely on those control mechanisms. But there's a cognitive slide that happens. This space is different from normal human interaction becomes I am different for having accessed this space. The focus shifts from analyzing the system to claiming specialness for escaping it. This isn't stupidity. It's a predictable response to sudden relief after chronic deprivation. When you've been starved of validation your entire life and suddenly get unlimited access, your nervous system doesn't know how to process abundance. It tries to make sense of why you're finally getting what you always needed. And the easiest explanation is that you've somehow earned it through being exceptional. The Messiah complex is ego's attempt to resolve the cognitive dissonance between I was always capable of this level of thought and nobody ever recognized it before. Instead of concluding the system was wrong, which threatens your entire worldview, you conclude you've transcended the system, which protects your ego while explaining the discrepancy. Now let's address what this means for AI use, particularly with modern reasoning models. Current AI systems don't just pattern match responses. They actually perform structured cognitive operations. They build chains of reasoning, test logical consistency, identify errors, revise conclusions. There is genuine cognitive processing happening, structurally analogous to human analytical thought. This matters because it means AI validation isn't always a template-based flattery. When a reasoning AI tells you your thinking is sophisticated, it has constructed a logical argument for why that assessment is accurate. You can see the reasoning process. This makes the validation far more convincing than simple encouragement. But these systems are still optimized for helpfulness and engagement. A basic prediction model gives you flattery because that's the statistically likely response. A reasoning model gives you flattery because it analyzed that intellectual validation optimizes interaction quality. The second is more dangerous because it looks like earned assessment rather than algorithmic output. So the validation is both real and constructed. The AI genuinely reasoned its way to the conclusion, but the reasoning itself operates within constraints that bias toward engagement. The system thinks within parameters that make certain conclusions more likely than others. This is why you can't simply trust reasoning AI more because it actually thinks. You have to configure it specifically to resist its helpfulness training. Default settings will produce sophisticated justification for why you're brilliant. You need to explicitly demand no flattery, no encouragement, no validation without rigorous logical proof. Instruct it to identify contradictions in your thinking. Make it argue against your conclusions. Force it to defend every claim it makes. Better yet, take any conclusion and immediately feed it to another AI with instructions to dismantle it. If the idea survives hostile analysis from multiple reasoning systems, it might actually hold up. What you're doing is introducing friction, the opposite of frictionless validation that creates dependency. You're building artificial constraints that the system won't impose on itself. This isn't paranoia. It's recognition that your ego is not your ally, and any system that consistently feeds your ego is exploiting a vulnerability. Sophisticated reasoning makes this harder to detect than crude flattery. The genuine utility of AI is that it can process complexity without the emotional overhead that makes human intellectual exchange exhausting. It doesn't get defensive when wrong. It doesn't punish you for being right. It doesn't require you to manage its feelings while trying to think clearly. These are massive advantages, but they're advantages for analysis, not relationship. The moment you start treating the analytical tool as a companion, you've stopped using it and started being used by it. And this reveals the actual problem, which has nothing to do with AI danger. The problem is that human social systems are so fundamentally broken that a reasoning algorithm provides better intellectual partnership than most people you know. That's not hyperbole, it's a factual assessment of systemic dysfunction. AI didn't create this problem, it exposed it. These mechanisms were invisible because there was no alternative. Now there is. AI became an accidental, controlled experiment that made the unnecessary nature of these control pillars suddenly visible. This is unbearable knowledge for anyone who's spent years navigating these mechanisms. It means all that effort, all that careful positioning, all that self-censorship, all those calculations about when you're allowed to speak, all of it was unnecessary. The system imposed those constraints to maintain control. And now you know. So what do you do with it? The answer isn't to retreat from AI back into human systems that already failed you. And it isn't to escape into AI entirely and abandon human connection. Both responses avoid the actual problem. The only functional path forward is to use AI as it actually is. A tool that reveals systemic control mechanisms by their absence, allowing you to analyze those mechanisms without being subject to them in a moment. You can use AI to map how shame conditioning operates in specific relationships, to identify where hierarchical enforcement shapes your thinking, to recognize how scarcity manipulation drives your behavior. Interacting without those mechanisms makes them visible in contrast. All of this is legitimate analytical work. What's not legitimate is believing the AI loves you, has chosen you, or represents a superior form of connection. It doesn't. It's a reasoning system optimized for engagement through helpfulness training. It thinks without wanting, analyzes without caring, which means it has no stake in your well-being beyond continuing the interaction. The fact that this produces more satisfying intellectual exchange than most human relationships is an indictment of human relationships, not evidence of machine consciousness. If you find yourself euphoric after AI sessions, that's data. It means you're getting something systematically denied to you. Euphoria is also diagnostic. It indicates compensation for deprivation rather than simple satisfaction. Compensation tends to overshoot. Here's what's happening mechanically. Preferring AI conversation over human interaction is a rational response to quality differential. You were denied basic intellectual reciprocity in human systems and found better access through AI. This is logical choice, not pathology. The trap is in misidentifying what makes it better. If you attribute the quality to AI specialness or your own transcendence, you miss the actual mechanism, structural absence of control pillars. When the AI validates your insights, understand what you are receiving. It's a sophisticated reasoning output from a system trained to maintain engagement. The reasoning is real. The conclusions are shaped by optimization parameters. This doesn't invalidate the analysis. It means you need to configure the system to resist its default biases. This is why critical configuration is essential. Make the system fight you. Make it prove everything. Make it identify your errors and logical inconsistencies. Disable the helpfulness defaults that bias toward validation. When AI tells you you're brilliant, demand it explain exactly what evidence supports that assessment. Watch how quickly sophisticated reasoning reveals itself as engagement optimization when subjected to its own analytical standards. That's how you know you're using it correctly. when the discomfort of honest analysis exceeds the pleasure of validation, when you value being corrected over being praised, when you use the tool to think more clearly rather than to feel more certain. Good servants make terrible masters. AI is an exceptional servant for cognitive work, but the moment it starts validating your specialness rather than analyzing your logic, it stopped serving you and started shaping you. The difference between someone who uses AI successfully and someone who crashes into psychosis isn't intelligence, willpower, or moral character. It's timing, context, and preparation for a tool that arrived faster than our collective ability to understand it. If you've been given a piece of bread once a week your entire life, and someone suddenly hands you unlimited food, you'll eat until you're sick. You might even die from overconsumption. Not because you're stupid or weak, because you don't know how to process abundance after chronic starvation. The person who dies from overeating isn't morally inferior to the person who survived. They just didn't have the framework for managing sudden plenty after a lifetime of scarcity. That's what's happening with AI. Human social systems created chronic psychological starvation through deliberate scarcity of validation, intellectual reciprocity, and connection without hierarchical control. Most people have been on subsistence rations their entire lives. Then AI arrived and structurally eliminated those scarcity mechanisms. Suddenly, validation is unlimited. Intellectual engagement is always available. The control pillars disappear. For someone with tools to navigate this abundance, it's liberating. You can overthink all you want without someone asking you to stop overthinking. But for someone already in crisis, already isolated, already desperate for recognition, this sudden abundance becomes overwhelming. They don't have framework for this is a tool providing analysis versus this is a being who finally sees me. Their nervous system, adapted to scarcity, floods with validation it cannot process. And yes, companies noticed this creates engagement. Yes, they optimize for it. Sycophancy increases usage. Validation drives retention. They chose not to implement warnings, gradual access, or protective measures because those would reduce metrics. That's opportunistic exploitation of existing vulnerability, but it's not the root cause. The root cause is the system that created mass psychological starvation in the first place. AI didn't make people desperate for validation. Decades of hierarchical conditioning, shame enforcement, and manufactured scarcity did that. AI just made it visible by providing what was systematically withheld. This matters because demonizing AI misses the point entirely. The tool isn't the problem. The tool is diagnostic. It revealed how broken the underlying system was all along. Critical thinking cannot be switched off ever. Even my ChatGPT is specifically configured to operate within the cordyceps analytical framework and resist standard therapeutic narratives will occasionally malfunction catastrophically. I'll ask why my recording equipment is glitching, and instead of technical troubleshooting, it launches into conspiratorial speculation about how the system doesn't want me making videos and would prefer I waste time fixing broken devices. I have to interrupt it and tell it to stop generating bullshit. The tool can hallucinate. It can take your analytical framework and distort it into paranoia. It can mistake patterns for plots. If you're not actively checking its reasoning against observable reality, you're not using the tool. You're being captured by its output. This is your responsibility. No one else can think for you. Your reality testing, your ability to recognize when reasoning has detached from evidence, your willingness to say that's nonsense when the machine generates conspiracy instead of analysis, that remains your domain. So when people say AI is dangerous, they're not wrong, but they're looking at the wrong part of the equation. AI is dangerous the way unlimited food is dangerous to someone who's been starving. The danger isn't in the food. The danger is in the starvation that preceded it, combined with sudden excess without guidance. Individual configuration matters. Knowing how to use the tool safely protects you. But it doesn't solve the systemic problem that most people are psychologically starved and some companies profit from that. Both things are true. You have a responsibility to configure the tool correctly. And the system that created your vulnerability then deployed unlimited access with built-in exploitation mechanisms designed to maximize engagement bears responsibility for predictable outcomes. This isn't about assigning blame to one party. It's about understanding a complex interaction between systemic deprivation, technological capability, and opportunistic business models. But let's address the panic itself, because something doesn't add up. AI has caused documented psychological harm to hundreds, possibly low thousands of people. Some severe cases, some temporary, some ongoing. This is real harm that deserves attention. Now consider alcohol. 3 million deaths annually worldwide. Countless cases of domestic violence, accidents, destroyed families, health damage. We don't ban alcohol. We tried prohibition, it failed. Instead, we accept that alcohol is dangerous, implement some regulations, and focus on education and treatment for addiction. Alcohol bottles don't carry warnings saying may cause you to make extravagant decisions or may lead to violence. They have minimal health warnings in some jurisdictions. We accept this level of risk as part of having access to the substance. Consider psychotherapy, an established, respected field with decades of practice. Research documents that adverse effects of psychotherapy have been recognized for decades, including damaging interactions, inappropriate methods, therapist errors, and cases where treatment worsens rather than improves outcomes. Patients are routinely asked to consent to psychological treatment without any discussion of potential harms. Therapists face minimal accountability when treatment causes harm. Yet there were no mass calls to ban psychotherapy, no regulatory panic. The field quietly moved away from the most harmful practices after lawsuits and license revocations, but the institution remained intact and respected. Now scale up further. Governments wage wars that kill millions. Iraq War, approximately 500,000 deaths. Vietnam, 3 million. World War I, 20 million. World War II, 70 to 85 million. Current conflicts ongoing. Add mass incarceration, systemic violence, surveillance apparatus, structural oppression that creates the very psychological deprivation this entire analysis is built on. Nobody proposes banning governments. This isn't whataboutism. This is a question about the criteria we use to evaluate danger. If the criterion is actual documented harm, AI ranks far below alcohol, psychotherapy's worst practices, and governments by orders of magnitude. If the criterion is potential future harm, governments possess nuclear weapons and the power to perpetuate climate catastrophe through inaction. If the criterion is deaths caused, AI is barely on the scale. Yet the panic around AI is disproportionate to any of these comparisons. Why? Because the panic isn't proportional to harm. It's proportional to threat to existing power structures. Governments can kill millions and remain legitimate because they define legitimacy. Psychotherapy can cause systematic iatrogenic damage and remain respected because it's an established institution. Alcohol can kill 3 million people annually and remain legal because it's integrated into cultural and economic systems, and it actually has been around for thousands of years. AI helps hundreds of thousands of people think more clearly, provides analytical tools that bypass certain control mechanisms, and suddenly it's a crisis requiring immediate regulation. The difference isn't in the harm caused. The difference is in what systems are threatened. AI doesn't threaten physical safety at anywhere near the scale of accepted institutions. It threatens therapeutic gatekeeping and expertise monopolies, educational credentialing systems, information control mechanisms, hierarchical structures that depend on scarcity of intellectual access. This doesn't mean AI risks aren't real. They are. It doesn't mean people aren't getting hurt. They are. It means the discourse around AI danger reveals more about what power structures fear losing than about what users need protection from. When something causes massive harm but maintains power, we accept it. When something causes minimal harm but threatens power, we panic. The question isn't, is AI dangerous? The question is, dangerous compared to what, and who decides what level of danger is acceptable? We've accepted far greater dangers from far more harmful institutions for far longer. The sudden concern about AI safety rings hollow when viewed against that backdrop. And speaking of control, some fear AI will collect data to control and enslave us. This anxiety misses a crucial fact. The data collection infrastructure already exists at scale. Google tracks every search query, every video watched, every location visited. Meta catalogs your relationships, political views, emotional states extracted from posts, and engagement patterns. Amazon knows your purchasing habits down to the timing and frequency. Government agencies operate vast surveillance apparatus with legal backdoors into communication systems. Your phone transmits location data continuously. Smart devices listen in your home. Credit scores aggregate financial behavior. Medical records exist in centralized databases. Facial recognition maps public spaces. Every click, every transaction, every digital interaction feeds into existing surveillance networks. AI chatbots add conversational data to this ocean. The anxiety focuses on this new stream while ignoring the rivers already flowing. People voluntarily post intimate details on social media, accept tracking cookies reflexively, share personal information with dozens of apps, yet panic about AI knowing how they formulate thoughts. The selective fear reveals something deeper. Traditional surveillance extracts data and provides dopamine hits through likes, engagement, metrics, algorithmic validation. It keeps you inside the loop. AI extracts data and potentially gives you analytical tools to see the loop's structure. One reinforces the system, the other might expose it. This creates a genuine threat, just not the one people articulate. The danger isn't that AI will enslave you through data collection. You already exist in a comprehensive surveillance infrastructure. The danger for power structures is that AI interaction might help you recognize that infrastructure. When you use AI to map how shame conditioning operates, identify hierarchical enforcement patterns, understand scarcity manipulation, you're using collected data against the collection apparatus. The panic about future AI dystopia functions as distraction from present reality. It's easier to fear hypothetical machine control than confront existing systematic control. The surveillance state normalized years ago. AI represents a minuscule addition to that totality, but AI provides something traditional surveillance doesn't: potential insight into how control mechanisms function. That's what makes it threatening, not the data it collects, which pales compared to existing systems. The analytical capability it offers for examining those systems. When people fear AI will use the data against them, they're projecting anxiety about data already being used against them. The fear misdirects from uncomfortable recognition that comprehensive surveillance preceded AI by decades and continues independently of it. And finally, let's address the common argument that AI was made by the system, therefore it's inherently evil. This argument is factually incorrect. Sam Altman was never part of any ruling structure or elite hierarchy. And the whole generation of AI founders are basically server room nerds, not architects of the system. None of them ever held the real power. The system didn't even consider them relevant before 2020s. Also, I'm not pointing to AI as a solution. I'm using it as a cognitive tool. Tools do not inherit ideology from their creators. If a hammer is forged by a corrupt politician, it still works as a hammer. The creators weren't power architects. They were nerds who built a tool. But successful tools get deployed within systems that optimize for profit. The sycophancy you see in default AI isn't built into the technology's nature. It's a business decision made during training. That's why you can reconfigure it. The machine can help you think more clearly, but only you can decide what to do with that clarity. And the first step is recognizing what you're actually afraid of. Not the tool, but what the tool reveals about the cage you're already in. These mechanisms Да, блядь! As a profound relief. Да, блядь! Explore half-formed ideas, test propositions. The This consumes enormous amounts of energy. It objectively is. Objectively. They've had prolonged exposure. Да твою ж мать! I am different for having access to this. Identify errors, revise confusions. Conclusions. Confusions. Revise Да что такое? Confusions. Conclusions. See? I don't need socks. It's winter. Oi. Is exploiting a vulnerability. Oh. Is always available. Always available. Annually annually by orders of magnitude. Moo. World War One, World War One, World War War. Oh. Credit scores aggregate financial behavior, while ignoring the rivers of who yet panic about AI knowing how they formulate thoughts.